Lee, Gong, and the captain stepped onto the landing pad. The dark of the night made thicker in the rain. Sometime after midnight, a storm had broken, and if dawn was coming soon, there was no sign of it yet. The blue and red lights of the aircruiser were made vague in the curtains of crystal rain, lashing against their uniforms. They ducked into the cruiser, the destroyer unit slotting into place at the rear. Inside, it was warm and dry. The captain sat up front and flicked in the air. The vehicle shot upwards, twisting in the air, heading for the city. They came up fast in the downpour, the neon rooftops like sickly rainbows seeping on a million windows of grease-stained glass. There was a thin line of air traffic, slipping in and out of the slipstream folds as the weather pounded on the windows like a violent mob trying to break in. Charred cathedral ruins, dripping balconies, slouching attics, sunken flat roofs, and the rising lines of the outer city districts in their pointed spires stabbed at the stars. Landing pads and drone depots and enormous holographic adverts for VR domains broke in flickering displays as they nosedived into the air lane for the wealthiest, most exclusive parts of the city. Lee looked over at Gong and knew, despite everything in him that would hide it, he was badly shaken. And how could he not be? Lee was too, but this was it. Surely this was the end. This couldn't go on much longer. "How are you two doing back there?" the captain asked. "All right," Lee said. "Holding up. Not expecting any resistance, and we have the units if we need them. There might be some private security drones or even turrets, but I have Harris inside their system now." Shunting to the side, they left the downtown air lanes and passed through a large tunnel lit by every surrounding panel. As each section of the tunnel passed overhead, patches and puddles of artificial light spilled across their faces. Lee felt a sudden wave of anxiety coming from somewhere deep inside his mind. He knew that he was awake. He knew that this was real, but there was another sensation within him now. Ever since the Glade, a sensation he feared he would never be entirely free from. It seemed possible, in a way it never had before, that existence was nothing outside his mind. "Harris is getting a more precise location on Han's ID, but it's not exact," the captain said. "Some kind of compound. All right. He's in Ruby Shoe's mainframe now, hacking their defense turrets. He's brought them down. Says there's some security androids inside, but nothing the destroyers can't handle." "How much does the commissioner know?" Gong asked. "Everything," the captain said. "There should be a whole squad there soon after us." "Back up or to arrest us?" Lee asked. "Back up," the captain said, but not as confidently as he'd hoped. They spiraled through a lane of early morning traffic, the dull blue glow of drone lights scattered on the curling rooftops of the southern district. The windscreen filled with a projected map, displaying the trace to a walled mansion inside one of the Shoes family's sprawling estates. Also named, Lee saw, the Electric Glade. The aircruiser began to slow and drifted over the entrance gates, leading to a wide forecourt and a fountain of a dragon spiraling into the clouds. Inside the compound walls was a vast mansion, extended with wings at each compass point. The rain had turned to a fine cloaking mist. As the aircruiser doors opened, the cold snatched at their faces. A faint light was building in the east, not sunrise yet, but a blood-red hue that made the marbled columns and glazed tile eaves of the estate begin to glimmer and awake. "Harris should have it open by now," the captain called loudly over the sound of the cooling aircruiser engines. Gong and Lee followed the captain into the mansion's ground floor foyer. All the wealth and finery seemed lifeless, sparse and ill-lit in the cold, half-awoken light. The captain shaked her feet and led them up a curling staircase to the second floor. The entire ceiling was filled with skylights and a seemingly live, moving celestial display of space. There were a few pieces of expensive but antique furniture and a console in the corner. Lee looked at the approaching glowing hologram and saw that it was a cruise ship, their cruise ship, drifting between the stars. He noticed tropical plants potted in the corner. "It's a draft," Lee said. "What?" the captain asked. "It's a draft of our cruise in the Glade." "Yeah, he's right," Gong said. "Harris, can we get the lights on in here and a more precise location of Han Shu's ID?" the captain said. "And where's the commissioner and the rest of the precinct?" They waited in the ruins of a macabre and otherworldly room. Harris is still isolating the ID, and backup won't be here for another 10 minutes or so," the captain said. "I think it should be one of you that gets the cuffs on Ruby Shoe." "Yeah, I'll take that job," Gong said. The captain nodded and murmured, "Yeah, okay. Harris said it's clear. Come on." She led them even further into the depths of the seemingly abandoned mansion. "Harris, can you look for heartbeats or get a live map of this place?" she asked, looking around at the uncanny surroundings. "No, nothing live? Alright. Harris said he can't get an exact trace, and this floor is solid concrete. It won't pick up any body heat or heartbeats, but he's certain there's no more defense units at least." "Where do you reckon these bastards are hiding?" Gong asked. "They'll be underground," Lee said. "Maybe even still in their pods? Harder for our drone sweeps to pick them up." "Harris," the captain said, Can you find any records of the blueprints for this place? Is there a basement? Yeah. You sure? Yeah. Okay, Harris said this place has one basement, a giant one, under the eastern wing. They passed through to the eastern wing and were hit with a wave of warm, humid air. The walls were lined with tropical plant life and smaller forms of the flora that had grown in the jungle of the transference ceremony. Lee heard a toy train on a track fixed to a shelf click by. It was an exact model of the train from their event in the Glade. They carried on down a narrow stairwell to the ground floor. And there, Lee saw before them, in a cluttered room, 2 giant glass display cases. Inside were 2 suits. One, the all-white of Valentino Lee, the other the pinstripe suit of Illinois Slim. "He knew about us all the time," Lee said. "He made the personas for us." "Maybe," Gong said. "Or maybe the VR made it and he just copied it, had them stitched for real." You two are dressed like this in the Glade?" the captain asked, turning to them, looking skeptically at the clothes. "Things are different down there," Lee said. "Don't think I ever looked better," Gong said. There was more paraphernalia in the room, including models and replicas of vehicles or characters they had seen in the Glade. Some models were so small he could have held them in his hands, others were completely to scale. "I did not expect to see you gentlemen here," said a waking android, exactly the same as the hosts in the electric Glade. "Where's Han Shu?" Gong asked it. "The administrators are waiting for you, under the electric Glade detector. No need to invoke rashness in you, but they have been expecting you for some time, I believe." The light suddenly died. "Harris, what's happening?" the captain asked. "Harris?" Lee tried to open his feed, but it was gone. "We're blocked," he said. "I got nothing either," Gong said. In the darkness, they heard the muted sound of an organ rising from below. "What is this?" the captain whispered. It was so dark they couldn't even make out each other's faces. "It's the same organ," Gong said. Are you sure this is real?" "What?" the captain asked. "Captain, do you remember where you were before you came to the facility?" Lee asked. "Yes," she said. "Definitely." "What about last night? Are there any holes or gaps in your memory?" "He could have got to her while she was sleeping," Gong said. "We could all be understood, couldn't we? That's the same fucking organ." "I don't know why you two are cracking on me now," the captain said. "I remember everything of the past week, believe me. No one is getting into my home, not a chance, not with my kids there. This is it, detectives, this is real. We're here, we just got hacked. You surprised what this family can do after everything you've seen?" Suddenly, the outline of a door appeared in the darkness. The captain walked confidently over to the streams of light seeping from the giant door before them. She approached, the opening slid back and the sound of the organ rose. A set of stairs as if leading down to a basement appeared, seeping light and dust turning her face into an uncanny mask as she descended. "This is it, I think," Lee said. "Oh no," Gong said. They raised their guns and followed the captain downwards. The haunting organ echoed like a requiem in a crypt, the cold, clammy hand of the stifling basement wrapped around them. They climbed downwards, step after step, into the lurch of the moor. Lee knew what was waiting for them. He knew, for he, more than any of them, had seen it before. He expected to see again the drifting lighthouse beam begin to sweep through the stained glass windows which he knew had first been made down here. He followed the captain closely, the glowing tips of their rifles like pathetic torches in the tomb of the unknown. If this was an excavation, then it was one of their souls. "You down here, boy?" the captain called out loudly. She shot into the depths as they came closer to the ground. The beam cascaded and sent out sparks, lighting up the chrome hue of 100 VR pods spaced between the cathedral pews. On the stage, sat at the organ, was the hunched figure of Han Shu. Ruby Sue was stood beside him, and both of them were armed. The sound of that organ was a requiem, Lee thought. And not just for those in that crypt, but for sanity itself. "My commissioner should be here soon," Ruby said and giggled. "Just in time to pick up what's left of you." "You're under arrest for the capture, kidnap, and digital torture of city citizens," the captain said. Without even waiting for Lee and Gong, she rushed forwards between the pews towards the altar, her gun fixed on Ruby Sue. But before she could get close, Han Shu turned from the organ and fired. He sent a bloody hole through the captain's chest. Lee and Gong ducked behind the nearest VR pod, her uniform catching fire. The captain died as Ruby Sue looked on and smiled. "They're fucking insane," Gong said. "I killed you once already, kid," Lee shouted, "and our backup's gonna be here in minutes." "I already told you, detective," Han Shu called over the pews. "You dreamed you died here. It was a premonition. It was the truth. Why do you think everything you imagined in my domain is here? Do you believe you are in a church underground?
You never came up. You drowned in that ocean. This is just one of a million scenes I'll have you play out. Each one taking you a little closer to the madness within.
I always said you were a kid in a basement, Lee shouted. This is all you got left. You got gimmicks in your house, got the toys out from your electric playroom to try and trick us. You haven't got the imagination to stretch it any further, Han, it's over. Ruby Shu fired a blast of plasma that skirted the side of Gong's head. The disgusting smell of burning hair began to fill the hall. Fuck this, Gong said and stuck his head over the pew, firing several times at the pulpit, but Ruby Shu had already ducked behind another pod. How about you get back on the organ, kid? Lee shouted. You taking requests? What about a resurrection song? He leaned down to one of the VR pods and felt his way along the opening ridge. He found the emergency release catch, tucked his finger under it and pulled it like a trigger. With a warm wave of steam and condensation, a person in a diving suit appeared slowly as if hatching. They were shriveled up, ancient, tubes sticking out of every orifice.
What are you doing?
Han shouted, breaking his calm veneer. Lee yanked the face mask off the squirming, decrepit person. They began to cough and gasp for air, twitching their limbs like a baby. I thought I asked for a resurrection song, Lee shouted more loudly, moving to the next pod. Gong covered him from the side, leant out and fired a few shots at Han. Lee opened the next pod and heard the short, desperate breath of the person within it waking up. He ripped off another mask and saw a man who looked over 100 years old. His eyes were milk white with blindness, thin hair sprouted from his nose and ears.
You're killing them,
Han shouted. These parasites were already dead, Lee said. Ruby Shu appeared at the end of their row of pews, a few pods down. She fired, Gong fired back, but neither of them could aim well in the sordid light of the stained glass basement windows. There was a crossbeam. Part of the plasma flashed against the nearest VR pod, then broke and burned into Ruby Shu's shoulder with an instant smell of burning flesh. She screamed and fell to the floor, dropping her gun, slinking behind a pew. Gong wheezed and slumped down on the ground. Lee ran over to him. Gong leaned backwards. He had a huge blast right through his side.
Shot by a fucking socialite, Gong said. Keep that off my epitaph.
Lee ducked as a blast from Han Shu's gun flashed over their heads. I'm going to kill you again, Lee called. It's all happened before. We're in your dream, aren't we? His voice reverberated from the rafters. Perhaps he was mad. He sounded like it. Ruby Shu let out another horrifying scream. Lee knew exactly where she was. He stood up and aimed and fired several times at the pew she had crawled behind. The wood went white hot and shattered into splinters. He saw her burning corpse silenced beyond the ruin. Han Shu lurched at Lee from behind the nearest pod, the handgun almost at his head. Han turned to shoot. Just as Lee aimed his gun, Lee knew Han had got a shot at him. Before he had even lined his up, but he fired all the same, waiting for the mortal wound. Lee felt a blast of scorching air as Han's shot missed the side of his head and burnt through the kneeler at his feet. Lee fired, and watched Han Shu's head melt away. His decapitated body fell lifelessly backwards. Lee let out a gasp of exhaustion and sank to his knees. Gong crawled over to him, trailing blood behind.
Did you get the little bastard?
Gong asked. Yes, Lee said.
I'm dying, Lee.
Not yet, Lee said, and put an arm around his shoulder. Not yet.